The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Willow Creek, Montana, in the autumn of 1876, but Zara Ellis didn't flinch. She'd grown accustomed to the sound of firearms in the 3 years since she'd inherited her father's struggling ranch. Standing on her porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, she knew today would change everything. Her last chance to save her family legacy rested on a wild idea that no one in town believed could succeed, no one, except the mysterious cowboy who'd ridden onto her property just a week ago. "Miss Ellis, the horses are saddled," called a deep voice from the barn. Zara turned to see Kirk Vance leading 2 horses toward her, 1 chestnut mare and 1 midnight black stallion. At 32, Kirk was all hard edges and quiet strength, his face weathered from years under the western sun. His clothes were worn but meticulously clean, and the 6-shooter on his hip looked like it had seen its share of trouble. "I still think we should wait for a larger crew," Zara said, pulling on her riding gloves. At 25, she'd learned to hide any sign of uncertainty behind a mask of determination. Her father had taught her that the West respected only those who stood their ground. Kirk shook his head, his eyes the color of a summer storm. "The Blackwater gang won't wait, madam. Those cattle need to move now if we're going to get them to Cheyenne before winter. 2 people driving 500 head of cattle across 3 territories. It's never been done." Zara sighed, tucking a strand of auburn hair beneath her wide-brimmed hat. "Not by a woman and a drifter, that's for sure," Kirk replied with the hint of a smile that rarely reached his eyes. Zara knew the townspeople had been gossiping since Kirk's arrival. A lone cowboy with a reputation for trouble taking orders from a woman. It was scandalous enough to fuel conversations at the saloon for weeks, but Zara had bigger concerns than wagging tongues. The bank was threatening foreclosure, and the only way to save the Ellis Ranch was to get her cattle to market before the first snow. "Mr. Vance, do you know what they're saying in town about us?" she asked, mounting her mare with practiced ease. Kirk swung into his saddle, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. "I reckon I've heard enough. They'll laugh at you for this," Zara said, her voice softer than she intended. "A renowned gunslinger taking orders from a woman half your size, driving cattle on a suicide mission." Kirk's eyes met hers, and for the first time since his arrival, she saw something beyond the careful control he maintained, a flicker of defiance, perhaps even pride. "Then let them laugh," he replied simply, turning his horse toward the pasture where the cattle grazed. "Ain't the first time, won't be the last. Coming, Miss Ellis." Zara nodded, something warm and unfamiliar spreading through her chest as she followed him toward the rising sun and whatever fate awaited them on the trail ahead. The first day on the trail proved more challenging than either had anticipated. The late September heat pressed down relentlessly as they pushed the herd north through the valley. Kirk rode point, his sharp whistle guiding the lead steers, while Zara worked the flanks, keeping stragglers in line. By midday, dust coated every inch of them, and Zara's throat felt like sandpaper. She'd grown up on this ranch, had helped with cattle drives before, but never as the boss. Her father had always managed the men, while she'd learned the business side of ranching. Now she was responsible for everything, including the mysterious cowboy who'd appeared just when she needed help most. "We should water them at the creek ahead," Kirk called back to her, gesturing toward a line of cottonwoods in the distance. "Give them a rest before tackling the ridge." Zara nodded, impressed by his knowledge of the land. He'd only been in Willow Creek for a week, yet he navigated the terrain like a man who'd ridden it for years. As they settled the herd near the creek, Zara dismounted and stretched her aching muscles. "You seem to know this country well for a drifter," she observed, watching as Kirk checked his horse's hooves. He didn't look up. "Passed through once before, few years back, with another cattle drive, something like that." His tone closed the subject. Zara handed him a canteen. "You don't talk much about your past, Mr. Vance." "Not much worth telling." He took a long drink. "And it's Kirk. If we're going to drive these cattle to Wyoming together, might as well drop the formalities." She studied him as he drank, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the calluses on his hands, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. He was a man accustomed to watching his back. "Why did you agree to help me, Kirk, when every other cowhand in town refused. He corked the canteen and handed it back. Maybe I needed the work. There's easier work than this, she countered, and you don't strike me as a man who makes decisions based on convenience. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps I admire your grit, Miss Ellis. Not many would take on a challenge like this. Zara, she corrected, if we're dropping formalities. He nodded once, then turned to remount his horse. We should move on, want to make it to Copper Canyon by nightfall. They rode in comfortable silence for the next few hours, the rhythm of the cattle drive setting a steady pace. Zara found herself watching Kirk more than necessary. Intrigued by the contradictions he embodied, gentle with the horses, but clearly dangerous when needed, respectful of her authority yet confident in his own skills. As the sun began its descent, turning the Montana sky into a canvas of orange and purple, the distant outline of Copper Canyon came into view. Zara felt a small victory in reaching their first milestone, but the real challenges still lay ahead. "Company coming," Kirk said suddenly, his voice low and tense. Zara followed his gaze to see 3 riders approaching from the east, dust clouds rising behind them. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle strapped to her saddle. "Easy," Kirk cautioned. "Could just be travelers." But as the riders drew closer, Zara recognized the lead man, Henry Walsh, foreman of the neighboring Harrison Ranch and a longtime enemy of her father's. "Well, look what we have here," Walsh called out, reining his horse to a stop several yards away. "Jeremiah Ellis's little girl playing cowboy." His eyes shifted to Kirk. "And you must be the hired gun I've heard about. Vance, isn't it?" Kirk's expression remained neutral, but Zara noticed how he'd positioned himself between her and the newcomers. "What do you want, Walsh?" she demanded. "Just being neighborly," Walsh replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Concerned about a woman trying to drive cattle through Blackwater territory. Might be safer to sell those beeves to Mr. Harrison before you lose them and more." "These cattle aren't for sale," Zara stated firmly. Walsh's smile faded. "Your father was stubborn too. Look where it got him." Zara felt anger rise in her throat. Her father's death had been ruled an accident, a fall from his horse during a thunderstorm, but she'd always had her suspicions about Harrison's involvement. Before she could respond, Kirk spoke up. "You've delivered your message, Walsh. Now move along. We've got cattle to drive." Walsh's eyes narrowed as he studied Kirk. "I know your reputation, Vance. Didn't figure you for a man who'd take orders from a woman." "And I know yours," Kirk replied coolly. "Didn't figure you for a man who'd threaten one." Tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. Walsh's hand hovered near his pistol and Zara held her breath. After a long moment, Walsh spat on the ground and turned his horse. "Harrison won't be pleased," he called over his shoulder as they rode away. "This trail runs through his land, remember that." When they were out of earshot, Zara released a shaky breath. "Harrison doesn't own this trail. It's open range by territorial law." "Men like Harrison make their own laws," Kirk said, watching the departing riders, "and they enforce them however they see fit." "Is that why you carry that gun? To enforce your own laws?" Kirk's eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed something haunted in their depths. "No, madam. I carry it because men like Harrison exist." They made camp that night in a protected alcove of Copper Canyon. As Zara tended the fire, Kirk kept watch over the herd, occasionally checking the perimeter of their camp. The encounter with Walsh had left them both on edge. Over a simple meal of beans and jerky, Zara broke the silence. "You knew who Walsh was talking about when he mentioned Harrison?" Kirk nodded, staring into the flames. "Samuel Harrison has a reputation that extends beyond Montana territory, land-hungry, ruthless in business. He's been trying to buy our ranch for years," Zara explained. "My father refused every offer. After he died, Harrison thought I'd be an easy target." She poked at the fire with a stick. "Everyone did. Yet here you are, driving cattle to Cheyenne instead of selling out." "The Ellis Ranch is all I have left of my family," Zara said softly. "My mother died when I was 12, my brother in the war. It's not just land, it's their memory, their legacy." Kirk studied her across the fire, his expression thoughtful. "Most people wouldn't understand that kind of loyalty." "Is that why you took this job? Because you understand?" He was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. Finally, he set aside his empty plate. I took this job because sometimes a person deserves a fighting chance, even when the odds are stacked against them. Something in his words touched her deeply, as if he'd seen beyond her determination to the fear she worked so hard to hide. "And what about you, Kirk? What are you fighting for?" His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment the carefully constructed walls seemed to lower. Redemption, maybe. Or just a reason to keep moving forward. Before she could ask more, a low, distant rumble interrupted them. Kirk was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun. "Thunder?" Zara asked, rising to join him. "No." His face was grim in the firelight. "Riders, multiple horses coming fast." Fear shot through her veins. Harrison's men, could be, or someone else whose herd were moving cattle with minimal protection. He grabbed his rifle. "Stay here, keep your gun ready." "I'm coming with you," Zara insisted, reaching for her own weapon. Kirk looked like he wanted to argue but nodded tersely. "Stay behind me, then." They moved quietly toward the edge of camp, using the darkness as cover. The rumbling grew louder, and Zara could now make out the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. Her heart pounded against her ribs as Kirk signaled for her to take position behind a large boulder. The riders emerged from the darkness, 6 men, all armed, moving deliberately toward their camp. Zara recognized Walsh among them. "They're heading for the cattle," she whispered. Kirk's jaw tightened. Cattle rustlers don't usually announce themselves with this much noise. They want us to know they're coming. A warning, then, or a challenge? Kirk checked his rifle. Either way, we can't let them near the herd. Without waiting for her response, he stepped out from their hiding place, rifle raised but not aimed directly at the approaching men. "That's far enough," he called, his voice carrying across the night air. The riders slowed and Walsh moved to the front of the group. "Just passing through Vance." "Public trail, remember? At night, armed, I don't think so." Kirk's stance was relaxed but ready. "Turn around, come back in daylight if you have legitimate business." Walsh laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "You're outnumbered, gunslinger. And we've got orders to escort these cattle back to Harrison Ranch for safekeeping." "Theft is still a hanging offense in Montana territory," Kirk replied evenly. "Not theft when we're protecting valuable livestock from an incompetent owner," Walsh sneered. "No jury would convict us once they hear about a woman and a hired gun trying to drive 500 head alone." Zara stepped out from behind the boulder to stand beside Kirk, her rifle steady in her hands. "These cattle belong to the Ellis Ranch and they're staying with us." Walsh's expression darkened. "Don't be foolish, girl. Put down your weapons and walk away. Harrison's even willing to pay you fair market price as a courtesy." "The answer is no," Zara stated firmly. "Now get off my trail." For a tense moment, no one moved. Zara could feel the weight of the moment, the precarious balance between words and violence. She'd grown up around guns but had never faced a situation like this before. Suddenly, a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt near Kirk's feet. Before Zara could react, Kirk had pushed her down behind the boulder and fired back, his movements lightning fast and precise. Chaos erupted as the night exploded with gunfire. Zara found herself pressed against the earth, Kirk's body partially shielding hers as he returned fire. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, and somewhere in the distance, the cattle began to stir nervously. "Stay down," Kirk ordered, reloading with practiced efficiency. But Zara wasn't about to cower while someone else fought her battles. She raised her rifle and fired at a rider attempting to circle around toward their herd. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to make the man retreat. The exchange lasted only minutes, though it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, 2 of Harrison's men had been wounded, one in the shoulder, another with a graze across his thigh. None of Kirk's shots had been fatal, Zara noted with relief. "This isn't over," Walsh shouted as they retreated, supporting their injured companions. "Harrison will hear about this." As their hoofbeats faded into the night, Zara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands trembled as she lowered her rifle. Kirk turned to her, his expression a mixture of concern and something she couldn't quite name, respect, perhaps. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her voice wouldn't cooperate immediately. When she finally spoke, it came out steadier than she felt. You could have killed them. Didn't need to, he replied simply, checking her for injuries despite her assurance. Dead men cause more problems than wounded ones. You've done this before, she observed. It wasn't a question. Kirk's eyes met hers in the moonlight, and for a moment the hardened gunslinger facade slipped. Too many times. Something in his voice, regret, weariness, touched Zara deeply. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. Thank you for being here. He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. The connection between them seemed to shift, transforming into something neither had anticipated. We should check on the herd, he said finally, his voice rough, and move camp. They might come back with reinforcements. As they walked back toward the cattle, Zara was acutely aware of Kirk beside her, his steady presence, the skill with which he'd protected them both, and the gentleness that seemed to contradict his dangerous reputation. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel completely alone. But she also recognized the complication this presented. They had nearly 500 miles still to travel, Harrison's men to contend with, and a business arrangement that didn't allow for personal entanglements. Whatever she was beginning to feel for Kirk Vance would have to wait if it could exist at all. Dawn broke over the eastern horizon as Zara and Kirk drove the cattle deeper into the high country, leaving Copper Canyon behind. They'd traveled through the night, pushing the herd at a steady pace to put distance between themselves and any potential pursuers. The animals were restless after the gunfire, requiring constant attention to prevent strays. By mid-morning, exhaustion had settled into Zara's bones, making each movement an effort of will. She noticed Kirk watching her with concern as she struggled to keep her eyes open in the saddle. There's a sheltered valley ahead, he called to her, pointing toward a grove of pines in the distance. Good grazing, water, and defensible. We should rest there. Zara wanted to argue they needed to make up time after the delay, but she knew pushing beyond their limits would only lead to mistakes. She nodded her agreement, and they guided the herd toward the promised sanctuary. The valley proved to be everything Kirk had described, a peaceful oasis nestled between rocky ridges, with a clear stream running through its center and enough grass to satisfy the cattle. As the animals settled to graze, Zara dismounted on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her. Kirk was beside her instantly, a steadying hand at her elbow. When did you last sleep properly? Before we left the ranch, she admitted, too tired to pretend otherwise. Maybe the night before that, his brow furrowed with disapproval. You should have said something. And confirm what everyone believes, that a woman isn't strong enough for this work. Kirk's expression softened. No one who saw you stand your ground last night would question your strength, Zara. The way he said her name like it meant something important sent a flutter through her chest despite her exhaustion. Get some rest, he continued, guiding her toward a flat area beneath a large pine. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too, she protested weakly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Years of habit, madam. I can go longer without sleep than most. Too tired to argue further, Zara allowed him to spread a blanket for her in the shade. As she stretched out on the makeshift bed, the tension began to drain from her muscles. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Kirk sitting nearby, rifle across his knees, his vigilant gaze sweeping the perimeter of their temporary haven. When Zara awoke, the sun had moved across the sky, indicating she'd slept for several hours. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then relaxed as she spotted the cattle grazing peacefully nearby. Kirk was nowhere to be seen. Panic fluttered in her chest until she heard the sound of splashing from the direction of the stream. Rising to her feet, she followed the noise to find Kirk kneeling by the water's edge, his shirt off as he washed trail dust from his upper body. Zara froze, knowing she should announce her presence or retreat, but found herself unable to do either. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, she could see the map of scars across his back, some old and white with age, others more recent. The evidence of a violent life was written on his skin, yet there was a grace to his movements, a controlled power that spoke of discipline rather than brutality. As if sensing her presence, Kirk turned suddenly, reaching for his gun before recognition dawned in his eyes. Zara, he said, relaxing slightly, you're awake. Heat rushed to her cheeks at being caught staring. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, it's fine." He reached for his shirt, pulling it on with efficient movements that concealed the scars once more. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she replied, grateful for the change of subject. "Thank you for keeping watch." He nodded, buttoning his shirt. "The cattle are settled, no sign of trouble. We can stay here until morning if you'd like." Zara considered this. They'd lost time, but pushing on immediately might be riskier than waiting for full rest. "That seems wise. We'll need our strength for what's ahead." Kirk gathered his belongings from the streamside and walked toward her. Up close, she could see that he'd also taken the opportunity to rest. The shadows beneath his eyes had lightened, though vigilance still radiated from every line of his body. "I've been thinking about our route," he said as they walked back toward their camp. "Harrison will expect us to take the main trail through Devil's Pass. It's the quickest way to Wyoming, but also the most obvious." "You're suggesting we find another way?" He nodded. "There's an old trapper's path that cuts through the eastern foothills, longer by a day or two, but less traveled. Harrison's men would have a harder time finding us there." "You know this path?" Zara asked, curious about his knowledge of the territory. A shadow crossed his face. "I do, traveled it once under different circumstances." Before she could inquire further, they reached their camp, and Kirk busied himself building a small fire. Zara set about preparing a meal from their supplies, working alongside him in a comfortable rhythm that belied the short time they'd known each other. As they ate, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Zara found the courage to ask what had been on her mind since the previous night. "The way you handled yourself during the gunfight," she began carefully. "That wasn't just experience, it was professional." Kirk's hands stilled briefly before he continued eating. "I've had cause to use a gun more than most." "Were you a lawman?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "Some might say the opposite." Zara studied him across the fire. "The rumors in town." "They say you rode with Jessup's gang during the border wars." His eyes met hers, unflinching. "And if I did?" Jessup's gang had been notorious throughout the territories during the chaotic years after the Civil War, hired guns who worked both sides of the law depending on who paid better. They'd been feared, respected, and eventually hunted down after a botched bank robbery in Kansas City had left several civilians dead. "Did you?" she pressed. Kirk set his plate aside. "Yes, for 3 years after the war, I was young, angry, and good with a gun." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Zara sensed the carefully controlled emotion beneath it. It seemed like a way to survive when nothing else made sense. "What happened?" Jessup changed, or maybe I did. Kirk stared into the flames. "The last job went bad, innocent people died. I wanted out, but Jessup didn't let men leave." His hand unconsciously touched his side where Zara suspected another scar lay hidden. "I left anyway. You've been running since." "Moving," he corrected. "There's a difference." Zara absorbed this revelation, measuring it against what she'd observed of the man before her. The gunslinger reputation was earned, clearly, but there was more to Kirk Vance than violence and skill with weapons. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "It can't be easy to share that past." "You deserve to know who's riding with you," he replied, his eyes finding hers across the fire. "If you want me to leave, no," Zara interrupted, surprised by the force of her own response. "Your past is your own. I'm concerned with the present, and right now I need you here." She paused, realizing how that sounded. "For the cattle drive," she added hastily, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "For the cattle drive," he agreed. As night deepened around them, they settled into a companionable silence. Zara found herself watching Kirk as he tended the fire, wondering about the path that had brought him to her ranch and the strange twist of fate that had made this dangerous man her only ally. "We should get an early start tomorrow," she said eventually. "If we're taking the longer route, we'll need to make good time," Kirk nodded. "I'll take first watch. You get some more rest." Zara wanted to protest, but knew he was right. She needed to be at her best for the challenges ahead. As she prepared her bedroll, she found herself unexpectedly comfortable in his presence, despite all she'd learned about his past. "Kirk," she said as she settled beneath her blanket, "whatever you did before, you're helping me now. That counts for something." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Good night, Zara," he said finally, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Good night," she replied, closing her eyes with the strange certainty that despite everything Harrison's threats, the dangers of the trail, and Kirk's complicated past, she was exactly where she needed to be. The Eastern Trapper's path proved to be everything Kirk had promised: secluded, defensible, and mercifully free of Harrison's men. For 3 days, they drove the cattle through winding valleys and across shallow streams, gradually making their way southeast toward Wyoming territory. The difficult terrain slowed their progress, but offered its own rewards. The autumn landscape was breathtaking, with aspen groves blazing gold against the evergreen backdrop and wildlife abundant along the little-used trail. During these peaceful days, Zara found herself learning the rhythms of the trail and of the man who rode beside her. Kirk was a patient teacher, showing her techniques for managing the herd in rough country and sharing knowledge gleaned from years of traversing the Western territories. His instructions were clear and practical, never condescending despite her inexperience with a drive of this magnitude. In turn, Zara shared stories of growing up on the ranch, her father's lessons about business and land management, her mother's determination to bring culture and education to their remote home. She found herself speaking of things she rarely discussed, drawn out by Kirk's attentive listening and occasional insightful questions. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they made camp in a protected meadow, Zara noticed Kirk studying a worn map by the firelight, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Problems?" she asked, joining him after securing the horses. He traced a line on the map with his finger. "We're making good progress, but we'll need to rejoin the main trail eventually. There's no avoiding Devil's Pass if we want to reach Cheyenne before winter. How much farther until we reach the pass? 2 days, maybe 3 at our current pace." He folded the map carefully. "Once we're through it, we'll be in Wyoming territory. Harrison's influence doesn't extend that far. So we just need to get through the pass safely," Zara concluded, studying his expression. "You're worried," Kirk nodded. "It's narrow, easily defended, but also easily ambushed. If Harrison's men are waiting for us there, they'd have the high ground," she finished, understanding the tactical disadvantage. "Exactly." Zara considered this as she added wood to the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across Kirk's face, highlighting the concern in his eyes. Over the past days, she'd come to value his judgment, recognizing the strategic mind behind the gunslinger exterior. "What would you suggest?" she asked. He looked surprised at her question, as if unaccustomed to being consulted rather than giving orders. "We could try to find another route, but it would add weeks to our journey. The snow might catch us before we reach Cheyenne." "Not an option then," Zara thought for a moment. "What about sending scouts ahead or splitting the herd?" "Splitting the herd would make us vulnerable," Kirk replied, considering. "But scouting ahead has merit. I could ride out tomorrow, check the pass before we commit the entire herd." "Alone," Zara frowned. "That seems risky." "Less risky than walking 500 head of cattle into an ambush." She couldn't argue with his logic, but the thought of Kirk facing Harrison's men alone troubled her more than she wanted to admit. Over these days on the trail, he'd become more than a hired hand. He was a partner in this venture, and perhaps something more she wasn't ready to name. "We'll go together," she decided. "Leave the herd in this valley for a day. There's enough grazing and water. We can make better time on horseback without the cattle, scout the pass, and return by nightfall tomorrow." Kirk studied her, clearly weighing the risks against the benefits. "Harrison's men might find the herd while we're gone. The cattle are well hidden here, and they'll stay put with adequate food and water," Zara countered. "And I'm not sending you alone into what could be a trap." A hint of amusement crossed his features. "Are you worried about me, Miss Ellis?" "I'm protecting my investment, Mr. Vance," she replied with a raised eyebrow, though they both knew there was more to it than that. After a moment's consideration, Kirk nodded. "We'll leave at first light. Traveling light, we can reach the approach to the pass by midday." That night, as they took turns keeping watch, Zara found herself thinking about the journey ahead, not just the cattle drive, but what would come after. She'd been so focused on saving the ranch that she hadn't considered what success might look like beyond financial solvency. And then there was Kirk. What place would he have once the cattle were delivered and the drive was over? The thought of him simply riding away once the job was done left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. When morning came, they set out as planned, leaving the herd peacefully grazing in the sheltered valley. On horseback, without the slow-moving cattle to manage, they covered ground quickly, following the trapper's path as it gradually descended toward the main trail. They rode mostly in silence, each alert for signs of danger, but Zara found comfort in Kirk's presence beside her. There was an ease between them now that hadn't existed when they'd first set out from the ranch, a trust built through shared challenges and quiet conversations around evening fires. By midday, the terrain began to change, becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills that preceded Devil's Pass. Kirk led them to a hidden overlook that provided a view of the main trail stretching ahead. "There," he said quietly, pointing to a narrow defile between towering rock walls. "That's the entrance to the pass." Zara followed his gaze, taking in the natural choke point where the trail narrowed dramatically before winding between steep cliffs. "Perfect place for an ambush," she observed. Kirk nodded grimly. "And look there." He handed her his spyglass, directing her attention to a spot where the sun glinted off something metallic among the rocks above the pass. Through the glass, Zara could make out what appeared to be a small camp hidden among the boulders, 3 or 4 men, at least one rifle visible. "Harrison's men?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Most likely, waiting for us to bring the herd through." Zara lowered the spyglass, her mind racing through options. "We could try to go around them somehow." Kirk shook his head. "There's no other way through these mountains that can accommodate a herd that size, not without adding weeks to our journey." "We could confront them directly," she suggested, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Against entrenched positions on high ground, even Kirk's skill with a gun would be of limited value. "That would be suicide," he confirmed, his expression grim. They sat in tense silence for several minutes, the magnitude of the obstacle before them settling like a weight on Zara's shoulders. She'd known this journey wouldn't be easy, but facing the reality of Harrison's determination to stop them was still daunting. "There might be another way," Kirk said finally, his voice thoughtful. Zara turned to him expectantly. "I'm open to suggestions." "It's risky," he warned. "And it involves breaking our pattern." "What do you mean?" "Harrison's men are expecting us to come through with the herd during daylight hours," Kirk explained. "It's what any reasonable drover would do. The pass is treacherous enough in good light." Understanding dawned in Zara's eyes. "You're suggesting we move at night," he nodded. "A night drive through the pass. It's dangerous. One wrong step could send cattle over the edge, but with a nearly full moon and careful handling it might be possible." "And Harrison's men wouldn't expect it," Zara concluded, considering the strategy. "They'd be watching for us during the day." "Exactly. We'd still need to be quiet. Sound carries in these mountains, but darkness would give us an advantage they wouldn't anticipate." Zara weighed the risks against the increasingly limited alternatives. A night drive through treacherous terrain could result in lost cattle or worse, but facing armed men from a position of disadvantage seemed even more dangerous. "How many cattle might we lose?" she asked practically. "If we're careful, minimal losses," Kirk replied. "The trail through the pass is narrow but well-defined. Cattle tend to follow the leader, especially at night when they're more docile. And if we're spotted," his expression turned serious, "then we deal with that situation as it comes." Zara nodded slowly, making her decision. "A night drive, then. We'll need to prepare the herd, get them rested and watered before we attempt it." Kirk seemed pleased with her resolution. "We should head back now, reach the herd before dark. Tomorrow we rest the cattle, and tomorrow night we make our move." As they turned their horses to begin the journey back to the valley, Zara felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The plan was risky, but so was everything about this venture. From the moment she'd decided to drive the cattle herself rather than sell to Harrison, she'd been betting against the odds. "Kirk," she said as they rode side by side down the narrow trail, "thank you. Not just for the plan, but for staying with this." Most men would have walked away by now. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Most men haven't seen what you're capable of. The simple statement, delivered without flattery or exaggeration, warmed Zara more than any elaborate compliment could have. In Kirk's assessment of her abilities, she found a respect that had nothing to do with her gender or her family name. It was earned through her own actions and decisions. "We'll make it through," she said with newfound confidence. "And Harrison will learn that the Ellis Ranch isn't so easily defeated." The corner of Kirk's mouth lifted in a rare smile. "I don't doubt that for a moment." The day of preparation passed with tense anticipation. They moved the herd to a meadow closer to the main trail, but still concealed from casual observation, allowing the cattle to rest and graze abundantly before the challenging night ahead. Kirk and Zara used the time to scout the immediate approach to the pass, noting potential hazards and planning their route in detail. As dusk approached, Zara felt the weight of the coming challenge. She checked and rechecked their supplies, tested her horse's tack, and ran through Kirk's instructions in her mind. The cattle seemed to sense the unusual tension, growing restless as the sun dipped below the western mountains. "It's time," Kirk said quietly, appearing beside her as the first stars became visible in the darkening sky. "The moon will rise in about an hour. We should have the herd moving by then." Zara nodded, surprising herself with the steadiness of her hands as she mounted her horse. "I'm ready." They began gathering the cattle with minimal noise, using hand signals and soft whistles rather than the usual calls. The animals moved reluctantly at first, disturbed from their evening rest, but soon formed into a manageable column as Kirk guided the lead steers toward the trail. The moon rose as promised, bathing the landscape in silvery light that transformed the familiar terrain into something otherworldly. Shadows stretched long and deep across the trail, creating optical illusions that made Zara blink to maintain her focus. The cattle moved with unusual quietness, perhaps subdued by the strangeness of night travel. As they approached the main trail, Kirk signaled for Zara to join him at the head of the herd. "From here, we need to move steadily but carefully," he whispered. "The entrance to the pass is about half a mile ahead. Once we're in, there's no turning back until we reach the other side." Zara nodded, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. 500 head of cattle, her entire future, and Kirk's safety all depended on the success of this gamble. "Stay close to me," he continued, his voice barely audible above the soft shuffling of hooves. "If there's trouble, get the lead steers through no matter what. The rest will follow." "And you?" she asked, not liking the implication. His eyes met hers in the moonlight. "I'll be right behind you." Something in his tone made Zara want to argue, to insist they stay together no matter what, but she knew he was right. The herd was the priority. Without it, everything else was meaningless. They began the approach to the pass, moving as silently as possible given the size of their procession. The rocky walls loomed ahead, silhouetted against the night sky like slumbering giants. Somewhere above, Harrison's men waited, unaware that their quarry was passing beneath them under cover of darkness. The entrance to the pass seemed to swallow them, the walls rising on either side to block out portions of the star-filled sky. The trail narrowed, forcing the herd into a tighter formation. Zara could feel her heart pounding in her chest as they committed fully to the passage, the bulk of the cattle now following the leaders into the confines of the rocky defile. For nearly an hour, they progressed without incident, the only sounds the muffled hoofbeats and occasional soft lowing of the cattle. Zara began to hope they might make it through undetected after all. Then came the sound that turned her blood cold, a loose rock clattering down from above, followed by a startled curse and the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. "They've spotted us," Kirk hissed, immediately urging his horse closer to Zara's. "Keep moving, I'll handle this." Before she could protest, a shot rang out, the report echoing deafeningly between the pass walls. The cattle, startled by the sudden noise, began to move faster, threatening to stampede in the confined space. "Keep them together," Kirk shouted, no longer concerned with silence as he drew his pistol. "Get them through the pass." More shots followed, bullets ricocheting off the rocky ground near them. Zara focused on controlling the lead steers, preventing them from breaking into a dangerous run while keeping them moving forward. Behind her, she heard Kirk returning fire, the familiar sound of his revolver competing with the rifles from above. The pass seemed endless, each bend revealing only more moonlit trail hemmed in by towering walls. The cattle were fully agitated now, moving at a dangerous pace that threatened to become uncontrollable at any moment. Zara's arms ached from the effort of guiding her horse while signaling to the lead animals, her voice gone hoarse from the constant commands necessary to maintain order. A bullet struck the ground beside her, spraying her with rock fragments. Zara flinched but kept her position, aware that abandoning the lead would doom the entire herd. She glanced back to see Kirk providing covering fire, his silhouette outlined against the moon as he tracked targets above them. Then she saw movement on the trail behind him, riders emerging from a side canyon, cutting off their retreat. Harrison had been more thorough than they'd anticipated, positioning men both above and behind them. "Kirk," she called in warning, but he'd already seen the new threat. In one fluid motion, he turned his horse and fired twice in rapid succession, causing the pursuing riders to scatter for cover. The pass began to widen slightly, indicating they were approaching the halfway point. Zara allowed herself a moment of hope. If they could reach the wider section, the cattle would have room to spread out, reducing the danger of a catastrophic pileup. Another shot cracked through the night and Kirk's horse reared suddenly, nearly unseating him. Zara watched in horror as he fought to control the animal, which had clearly been hit though not severely wounded. "Keep going," he shouted to her as he regained control. "Don't stop for anything." The wider section of the pass appeared ahead, bathed in moonlight that revealed both the promise of easier passage and the danger of exposed position. Zara guided the lead steers into the open area, relieved to see the herd beginning to spread naturally into a more manageable formation. Behind them, the gunfire continued sporadically, but the distance from their pursuers was growing. The cattle, driven by instinct and fear, moved with surprising speed through the heart of the pass. Kirk rejoined her, his face grim in the moonlight. "We're not clear yet." There could be more waiting at the eastern exit. "How's your horse?" Zara asked, noticing the animal's labored breathing. "He'll make it," Kirk replied tersely, "but we need to keep moving. This position is too exposed." They pressed on, the cattle maintaining their urgent pace through the central portion of the pass. The trail began to narrow again as they approached the eastern section, the final gauntlet before reaching Wyoming territory. The moonlight played tricks on the senses, creating illusions of movement among the rocks. Zara strained her eyes, trying to distinguish between shadows and potential threats. Kirk rode beside her now, his injured horse keeping pace through sheer determination, his hand never far from his weapon. The eastern narrows loomed before them, a final challenge in their night crossing. As they entered the confined space, the echoing hoofbeats of the cattle created a thunderous percussion that would alert anyone waiting ahead. Zara felt exposed, vulnerable, certain that Harrison would have secured this exit as well. Yet as they passed through the final quarter mile of the pass, no shots came. The rocky walls gradually fell away, revealing the open country of Wyoming territory spread before them in silvery moonlight. The cattle, sensing the change, began to slow naturally, their panic subsiding as the confined space gave way to open plains. "We made it," Zara breathed, hardly daring to believe their success. "We're through." Kirk remained vigilant, scanning the terrain ahead and behind them. "We need to put more distance between us and the pass before we stop." Harrison's men could still be following. They drove the herd another 3 miles before finding a suitable location to rest, a shallow valley with a small stream and enough grazing to satisfy the exhausted cattle. As they finally allowed themselves to dismount, Zara's legs nearly buckled beneath her, the tension of the night's events catching up with her all at once. Kirk immediately set about caring for his injured horse, examining the bullet graze along its flank with gentle hands. "He'll be fine with some rest," he announced, relief evident in his voice. "It looks worse than it is." Zara approached him as he worked, the reality of what they'd accomplished slowly sinking in. "We lost maybe a dozen head in the confusion," she reported, "but the rest made it through." "A small price to pay," Kirk acknowledged, straightening to face her. In the moonlight, she could see a thin trickle of blood on his temple where a rock fragment or bullet graze had caught him. "You're hurt," she said, stepping closer to examine the wound. "It's nothing," he dismissed, but allowed her to inspect it nonetheless. Zara reached into her saddlebag for a clean cloth and canteen, gently cleaning the blood from his face. His skin was warm beneath her touch, his eyes watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster despite her exhaustion. "That was the most reckless thing I've ever done," she admitted, her voice soft in the night air, "and the most exhilarating." A ghost of a smile touched Kirk's lips. "You did well. Most experienced drovers wouldn't have attempted what we just accomplished." "We did well," she corrected, still standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I couldn't have done it without you." Something shifted in Kirk's expression, the careful distance he maintained giving way to something more vulnerable. Without thinking, Zara reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. For a moment, neither moved, suspended in a moment of possibility. Then Kirk gently caught her hand in his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that sent warmth flooding through her veins. "Zara," he began, his voice rougher than usual. "This isn't—" "Don't," she interrupted softly. "Don't tell me this isn't wise or proper or possible. Not tonight. Tonight we did the impossible." The rest of her words were lost as Kirk closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something hungry and urgent. Zara responded in kind, her hands gripping his shoulders as she pressed closer, all the tension and fear of the night transforming into a different kind of intensity. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Kirk rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates things," he murmured, though he made no move to step away. "Life is complicated," Zara replied, her hands still resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "But some complications are worth it." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his face and made him look younger, unburdened by the past he carried. "You're unlike anyone I've ever known, Zara Ellis." "Is that good or bad?" she asked, half teasing despite the vulnerability she felt. His answer was another kiss, gentler this time but no less meaningful. "Definitely good," he assured her when they parted, "but we should get some rest. We've still got a long journey ahead." As they set up camp in the moonlight, moving around each other with a new awareness, Zara felt a sense of clarity she hadn't expected. The cattle drive was far from over, the dangers not entirely behind them, but something fundamental had shifted. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The journey across Wyoming territory proved less eventful than their dramatic passage through Devil's Pass, but it presented its own challenges. Autumn was advancing rapidly, bringing colder nights and the threat of early snow in the higher elevations. They pushed the herd at a steady pace, making up time lost during their detour on the Trapper's Path. Kirk's knowledge of the territory proved invaluable as he guided them along routes with reliable water sources and good grazing. The cattle had recovered well from their night crossing of the pass, regaining lost weight on the rich grasslands of the Wyoming plains. As the distance from Montana and Harrison's influence increased, Zara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since her father's death, the future of the ranch seemed secure rather than precarious. If they reached Cheyenne with the bulk of the herd intact, the profit would be enough to clear the bank loans and establish a solid financial foundation. But it was the change in her personal circumstances that occupied Zara's thoughts during the long hours of riding. The connection between her and Kirk had deepened since that moonlit night beyond the pass, evolving into something neither had anticipated when they'd set out from the ranch. They maintained a professional demeanor during the day's work, focused on the herd and the challenges of the trail. But in the quiet evenings by the campfire, they gradually shared more of themselves, Kirk speaking of his childhood in Missouri before the war, Zara describing her dreams for the ranch's future. One evening, Camped beside a small tributary of the North Platte River with the cattle settled for the night, Zara found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for days. "What will you do after we reach Cheyenne?" she asked, watching Kirk's face in the firelight. He was silent for a moment, poking at the embers with a stick. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted finally. "Been taking life one day at a time for so long it's become a habit. You could." Zara hesitated, uncertain of her right to make the suggestion. "You could come back to the ranch. We'll need good hands for the winter, and after this drive, I could use someone who knows the business." Kirk looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "Is that what you want, a ranch hand?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Zara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "No," she said honestly. "That's not all I want." His expression softened, and he set aside the stick to move around the fire to her side. Sitting beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, he took her hand in his. "What do you want, Zara?" he asked quietly. "I want you," she replied simply. "Not just as a ranch hand or a trail boss, but as—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain of how to define what had grown between them. "As what?" he prompted gently. "As a partner," she finished, "in all ways." Kirk's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm despite the cool evening air. "You know what people will say, a woman like you with a man like me with my past." "Let them talk," Zara said, echoing his own words from the beginning of their journey. "I've never much cared for others' opinions of my choices." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's become clear." She turned to face him fully, needing him to understand the depth of her conviction. "I don't care what you've done or who you were before. I care about the man who's been beside me through this journey, who's faced down danger without flinching, who's taught me more in these weeks than I learned in years on the ranch." Kirk's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm gentle against her skin. "And what about the things I've done that can't be undone? The reputation that follows me?" "The past is gone," Zara said firmly. "We build our future from this moment forward, and I want you in mine if you'll stay." For a long moment, Kirk simply looked at her, his eyes searching hers as if seeking confirmation of what he'd heard. Then he leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words of his own desires. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've been running so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place," he admitted, vulnerability evident in his voice. "But for you, I'd like to try." The simplicity of his declaration, free from grand promises he might not be able to keep, touched Zara deeply. In a world where men often spoke in absolutes, Kirk's honesty about his own limitations was refreshing and far more meaningful than empty assurances would have been. "That's all I ask," she said softly, "that we try together." As the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, they remained close, planning not just the remainder of their journey to Cheyenne, but the beginning of a new journey together one neither had anticipated when they'd set out from the Ellis Ranch weeks before. 2 days from Cheyenne, with the cattle fat and healthy despite the long drive, they encountered another challenge, this one natural rather than human. A storm front moved in from the northwest, bringing with it the first serious threat of snow. The temperature dropped rapidly as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind carried the unmistakable scent of approaching winter. "We need to push them harder," Kirk decided after studying the threatening sky. "If we maintain this pace, we'll be caught in the open when that storm hits." Zara nodded, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. "How bad do you think it will be?" "Hard to say. Early season storms can be unpredictable, might be just a dusting, might be enough to strand us." He pointed to a distant line of hills. "There's a valley beyond those rises where the railroad company keeps a supply depot. If we can reach it before the storm breaks, we'll have shelter for ourselves at least." They increased their pace, driving the cattle with greater urgency than they had since Devil's Pass. The animals seemed to sense the coming weather, moving with less resistance than usual, their instincts aligning with the drovers' goals. By mid-afternoon, fat snowflakes had begun to fall, melting as they hit the ground but gradually increasing in frequency. The wind picked up, driving the snow sideways and reducing visibility. Zara's hands grew numb within her gloves as she worked to keep the herd moving in the right direction. Kirk rode back and forth along the length of the herd, his voice carrying even through the rising wind as he called encouragement and directions. Despite the worsening conditions, he maintained the calm efficiency that had characterized his leadership throughout the drive. As dusk approached, bringing with it heavier snowfall, the outline of the railroad depot finally came into view, a cluster of sturdy buildings nestled in the sheltered valley beyond the hills. Zara felt a surge of relief at the sight of civilization after weeks on the trail. "We'll lose light soon," Kirk called as he rode alongside her. "I'll ride ahead, make arrangements with the depot manager, keep them moving toward that stand of Cottonwood's good natural windbreak for the herd." Zara nodded, too cold and tired to argue about separation. As Kirk spurred his horse toward the depot, she concentrated on guiding the increasingly restless cattle toward the designated area. The snow was beginning to stick now, accumulating on the ground and reducing traction on the sloping terrain. By the time she reached the Cottonwood Grove, darkness had nearly fallen and the storm had intensified. The cattle huddled together instinctively, seeking warmth in their combined body heat as the snow swirled around them. Zara dismounted stiffly, her muscles protesting after hours in the saddle in cold conditions. She was securing her horse when she heard hoofbeats approaching through the gloom. Kirk appeared, accompanied by another rider, a stocky man bundled against the cold. "This is Mr. Peterson, the depot manager," Kirk introduced as they dismounted. "He's offered us shelter for the night, and his men will help watch the herd." "Mighty unusual to see a cattle drive this late in the season," Peterson remarked, looking curiously at Zara. "And with a lady drover, no less. The Ellis Ranch doesn't operate on the usual schedule," Zara replied with as much dignity as she could muster while shivering visibly. Peterson laughed good-naturedly. "So I see. Well, any friend of Vance here is welcome. My wife will be pleased to have another woman to talk to, gets lonely out here for her." 4 railroad workers arrived on horseback, prepared to take shifts watching the herd through the night. With the cattle settled as well as possible given the conditions, Zara and Kirk followed Peterson to the depot compound, a main building flanked by several smaller structures, all sturdily built to withstand Wyoming winters. The warmth that greeted them as they entered the main house was almost shocking after hours in the biting cold. A robust fire blazed in a stone hearth, and the smell of cooking food filled the air. Peterson's wife, a small, energetic woman with graying hair, hurried forward to welcome them. "My stars, you're half frozen," she exclaimed, helping Zara remove her snow-covered coat. "Come, sit by the fire. I've got stew nearly ready and hot coffee to warm you up." Zara found herself guided to a chair near the hearth, a mug of steaming coffee pressed into her hands. The simple comfort of a real chair, indoor warmth, and the prospect of a proper meal nearly overwhelmed her after weeks of trail conditions. Kirk settled nearby, accepting his own coffee with quiet thanks. In the firelight, Zara could see exhaustion etched on his face, though he maintained his usual alert posture. "Your timing is fortunate," Peterson remarked as his wife bustled about setting the table. "This storm's moving in faster than expected. Another day and the trail would have been impassable." "How long do you think it will last?" Kirk asked, warming his hands around his mug. "Hard to say. Early storms like this sometimes blow over quick, sometimes linger, but you're just 2 days from Cheyenne with good conditions." Peterson eyed them speculatively. "You folks planning to sell at the railhead?" Zara nodded. "We have a buyer arranged, Donovan Shipping and Cattle Company." Peterson's eyebrows rose. "Donovan, they're particular about who they buy from. Must be quality stock you're driving." "The best Montana has to offer," Zara affirmed with pride. Conversation flowed easily through dinner, with Peterson sharing news of the territories they'd been isolated from during their journey. Railroad construction was pushing westward at an unprecedented pace, he informed them. Cheyenne was booming as a shipping hub, with cattle prices strong due to increasing demand from eastern markets. "Your timing might be better than you know," he told Zara. "Word is Donovan's looking to fulfill a major contract for Army beef." If your herd's as good as you say, you might command premium prices. The news was better than Zara had dared hope. Premium prices would mean not just saving the ranch but potentially expanding operations, perhaps even adding the water rights to the northern section she'd been eyeing for years. After dinner, Peterson's wife Martha showed them to separate rooms in the back of the house. The luxury of a real bed, however simple, was not lost on Zara after weeks of sleeping on the ground. She thanked Martha profusely for the hospitality. "Think nothing of it, dear," the older woman replied warmly. "It's nice to have company, especially another woman. Most drovers who pass through aren't nearly so pleasant or clean," she added with a chuckle. Once alone, Zara peeled off her trail clothes and used the basin of warm water Martha had provided to wash away as much of the trail dust as possible. The simple act of cleanliness was restorative, helping to wash away the fatigue of the difficult day. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it a crack, she found Kirk standing in the hallway, similarly refreshed from his own ablutions. "I wanted to check that you're settled," he said, his voice low to avoid disturbing their hosts, "and to talk about tomorrow." Zara opened the door wider to allow him in, conscious suddenly of her state of relative undress, wearing only her clean undergarments and a borrowed robe from Martha. Kirk's eyes flickered briefly over her before returning resolutely to her face, a gentleman despite their growing intimacy. "Peterson says the storm should ease by morning," he informed her, remaining near the door. "If it does, we can make Cheyenne by tomorrow evening if we push hard." Zara nodded, relief flooding through her at the prospect of completing their journey. "And Donovan's buyer will meet us there. Peterson's sending a telegraph first thing to confirm our arrival. Given what he said about the Army contract, I expect they'll be eager to see our herd." They stood in silence for a moment, the culmination of their journey suddenly imminent. Weeks of shared danger and hardship had forged a bond between them that transcended their initial business arrangement, yet the practical reality of their arrival in Cheyenne loomed with its own uncertainties. "Kirk," Zara began hesitantly, "what we discussed about you returning to the ranch. Does that still stand after we reach Cheyenne?" He stepped closer, his expression softening. "If you'll still have me." "I will," she said without hesitation, "but I wanted to be sure. Once we sell the cattle, you'll have money enough to go anywhere, start fresh where no one knows your past." Kirk reached out to touch her face gently. "There's nowhere I'd rather be than with you, Zara. If you're offering me a place at the Ellis Ranch, I'm accepting not just as a hand, but as whatever you'll allow me to be in your life." The sincerity in his voice melted the last of her reservations. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the comfort of it. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered, "not for just to be close." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "Are you sure? Your reputation is already compromised beyond repair by traveling alone with you for weeks," she finished with a small smile. "Besides, I find I care less and less what others might think." Kirk smiled then, the rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "The woman I first met at the Ellis Ranch would never have said such a thing. She's changed," Zara admitted. "For the better, I think." "Definitely for the better," he agreed, leaning down to kiss her softly. They slept that night in the narrow bed, Kirk's arms around Zara and her head resting on his chest. The intimacy was more profound for its innocence, two people finding solace and belonging in each other's presence after years of isolation in their separate ways. Morning brought clearing skies and renewed determination. The storm had dropped several inches of snow but was moving eastward, leaving behind brilliant sunshine that would help clear the trail. After a hearty breakfast and heartfelt thanks to the Petersons, they set out for the final leg of their journey, the depot workers helping to get the herd moving. 2 days from now, you'll be heading home with enough money to secure the ranch for years to come," Kirk observed as they rode side by side at the head of the herd. "Your father would be proud." Zara smiled, feeling the truth of his words. "He would be. Though I'm not sure what he'd make of you," she added teasingly. Kirk chuckled, a sound she'd come to treasure for its rarity. "I reckon he'd have his doubts about a former gunslinger courting his daughter. Courting, is it?" Zara raised an eyebrow, enjoying the hint of color that touched Kirk's weathered cheeks. "If you'll allow it," he replied, suddenly serious despite her teasing. "Properly when we return to Montana. I may not be the most respectable man, but I can do right by you, Zara." The simple declaration, free of flowery promises but rich with genuine intent, warmed her heart more than any elaborate courtship ever could. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." The trail to Cheyenne passed without incident, the cattle moving steadily across the snow-dusted plains. By late afternoon of the following day, the sprawling outskirts of the frontier city came into view, a growing metropolis driven by the railroad's westward expansion. As they approached the stockyards on the edge of town, they were met by a representative from Donovan's Shipping and Cattle Company, a well-dressed man named Howard, who expressed pleasant surprise at the condition of the herd after such a long drive. "Mr. Donovan will be pleased," he assured them after inspecting a sampling of the cattle. "These are prime specimens, especially considering the journey they've made and the lateness of the season." The next hours passed in a flurry of activity, counting and documenting the herd, negotiating final prices, and completing the necessary paperwork. By sunset, Zara found herself in the office of James Donovan himself, accepting a bank draft for a sum that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. "You've impressed me, Miss Ellis," Donovan said as they concluded their business. "Not many ranchers could have delivered a herd of this quality so late in the season, and certainly none led by a woman." "I had excellent help," Zara replied, glancing at Kirk, who stood quietly by the door. Donovan followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Vance's reputation precedes him, though not always favorably. However, I judge men by their actions in the present, not rumors of the past." He returned his attention to Zara. "If you're interested in a regular arrangement, the Ellis Ranch could become a preferred supplier for Donovan's Shipping. We're always looking for reliable sources of quality beef." The offer was beyond anything Zara had hoped for. A standing business relationship with one of the territory's largest cattle buyers would provide security and stability for years to come. "I would be very interested in such an arrangement, Mr. Donovan." They parted with handshakes and promises of future business, stepping out into the bustling streets of Cheyenne as the evening lamps were being lit. For the first time in weeks, Zara and Kirk were free of immediate responsibilities, no cattle to mind, no dangers to anticipate, no decisions that couldn't wait until morning. "I've booked rooms at the Cattleman's Hotel," Kirk informed her as they walked through the town center. "Thought you might appreciate a real bath and proper bed before we start the journey home." The consideration behind the gesture touched Zara deeply. "That sounds heavenly," she admitted, "though I've grown rather accustomed to sleeping under the stars with you beside me." Kirk smiled, offering his arm in a gesture that seemed both protective and proud. "We've got plenty of starlit nights ahead of us, I expect." The Cattleman's Hotel proved to be one of Cheyenne's finest establishments, catering to the wealthy cattle barons and businessmen who frequented the growing city. Their arrival, trail-worn but carrying the unmistakable air of success, earned respectful attention from the staff, who escorted them to adjoining rooms on the second floor. A hot bath was arranged for Zara, along with the offer to have her trail clothes cleaned while she rested. For the first time in weeks, she was able to wash her hair properly, soaking in the luxury of cleanliness that had been impossible on the trail. Afterward, dressed in the single clean dress she'd packed for their arrival in Cheyenne, she felt renewed, still Zara Ellis, rancher, but perhaps a more confident version than the woman who had left Montana weeks earlier. A knock at her door revealed Kirk, similarly transformed by proper bathing and clean clothes. He'd even visited a barber, his face clean-shaven and his hair neatly trimmed. Without the trail dust and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, he looked younger, less hardened by life's trials. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes taking in her appearance with undisguised appreciation. "As do you," she replied with a smile, accepting his offered arm. "Shall we find dinner? I'm suddenly ravenous for something that wasn't cooked over a campfire." They dined at the hotel's restaurant, enjoying a meal that seemed impossibly luxurious after weeks of trail rations. Over coffee and dessert, they discussed the journey home, a simpler prospect with no cattle to drive, though the approaching winter would present its own challenges. "We should purchase a wagon," Kirk suggested. "The bank draft can be converted to cash tomorrow. We'll need supplies for the return journey, and a wagon would allow us to bring back items the ranch needs for winter." Zara nodded, appreciating his practical thinking. "And perhaps a few luxuries," she added with a smile. "I think we've earned them." As the evening progressed, a piano player began performing in the corner of the dining room, the gentle music creating an atmosphere of civilization that had been absent from their lives for weeks. Several couples rose to dance in the small area beside the piano. Kirk watched them for a moment before turning to Zara with an unexpected question. "Would you care to dance, Miss Ellis?" She looked at him in surprise. "I didn't know you danced." A hint of mischief touched his eyes. "There are still a few things you don't know about me. I wasn't always a gunslinger, you know." Zara accepted his hand, allowing him to lead her to the impromptu dance floor. As his arm encircled her waist and their hands clasped, she marveled at the contradictions of the man before her, capable of violence when necessary, yet holding her now with exquisite gentleness. Hardened by a difficult life, yet moving with unexpected grace to the music's rhythm. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as he guided her smoothly through the steps. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," he replied, a fond smile touching his lips at the memory. "Said it was part of being a gentleman no matter our circumstances." "She taught you well," Zara observed, enjoying the rare glimpse into his past. "What would she think of you now, I wonder?" Kirk considered this as they turned with the music. "She'd be glad I found my way back to something like a decent life, I think. She never gave up hoping I would, even when I was at my worst." "I wish I could have met her," Zara said softly. "She would have liked you," he replied with certainty. Strong women always recognized each other. As the music continued, they fell into comfortable silence, moving together as naturally as they had during the cattle drive, anticipating each other's movements without need for words. Zara felt the curious gazes of other patrons, a trail-worn couple among the more fashionable citizens of Cheyenne, but found she didn't care in the slightest what anyone thought of them. Later, as Kirk walked her to her room, a comfortable contentment settled between them, the satisfaction of a challenging job well done, combined with the anticipation of a future together that had seemed impossible weeks earlier. At her door, he paused, taking both her hands in his. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" she asked, puzzled by the sudden solemnity in his tone. "For trusting me when you had every reason not to, for seeing something in me worth believing in." His eyes held hers, earnest and unguarded. "For giving me a reason to stop running." Zara squeezed his hands, her heart full with emotions too complex for easy expression. "You gave me courage when I needed it most," she replied, "and showed me I was stronger than I knew. I think perhaps we saved each other." He smiled at that, bending to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Get some rest. We've got preparations to make tomorrow if we're to start home the day after." "You could stay," she offered quietly, a blush rising to her cheeks at her own boldness. Kirk's expression softened with tenderness. "Nothing would make me happier," he admitted. "But when I make you mine completely, Zara Ellis, it will be as your husband if you'll have me." The unexpected proposal, delivered without dramatic gestures but with profound sincerity, took Zara's breath away. "Are you asking me to marry you, Kirk Vance?" "I am," he confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Not because it's proper or expected, but because I love you, and because I want to build something lasting with you, a life, a future, a family if that's what you desire." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, happiness welling up from a place she'd almost forgotten existed, the part of her that had dreamed of love before responsibility and survival had consumed her thoughts. "Yes," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "Yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that promised a lifetime of such moments to come. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Zara saw in Kirk's eyes the same joy that filled her own heart. "When we return to Willow Creek," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "we'll make it official. "And if people talk, let them talk," she finished with a smile, echoing the words that had begun their journey together. "Their opinions matter far less to me than our happiness." Kirk's answering smile was radiant in its openness, the expression of a man who had found his way home after years of wandering. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, placing one more kiss on her lips before reluctantly stepping back. "Until tomorrow," she agreed, watching him walk to his own door before entering her room, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The journey home to Montana proved less eventful than their cattle drive, though not without its challenges. Winter was settling into the high country, bringing cold winds and occasional snow squalls that slowed their progress. The wagon Kirk had purchased in Cheyenne, loaded with supplies for the ranch, and a few carefully selected luxuries, required more careful handling on the increasingly snowy trails than horses alone would have needed. But the difficulties seemed minor compared to what they had already overcome together. Each evening as they made camp, Zara found herself looking forward to returning to the Ellis ranch not with the desperate determination that had driven her before, but with hopeful anticipation of the life she and Kirk would build there. They reached Willow Creek in early December, the familiar outline of the mountains surrounding the Ellis ranch a welcome sight after their long absence. News of their successful drive and substantial profit had preceded them, carried by telegraph and travelers' gossip. As they rode into town, they were greeted with a mixture of astonishment and newfound respect from the same townspeople who had predicted their failure. Mayor Thornton himself came out of the general store to welcome them, pumping Kirk's hand enthusiastically and complimenting Zara on her remarkable achievement. "We heard about your encounter with Harrison's men at Devil's Pass," he informed them, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Word is the territorial marshal is investigating Harrison for attempted cattle theft and intimidation. Your success has encouraged others to come forward with similar complaints." The news was a satisfying conclusion to their confrontation with the powerful rancher. Justice in the territories might be slow and imperfect, but the prospect of Harrison facing consequences for his actions was deeply gratifying. As they continued toward the ranch, Zara felt a surge of emotion at the sight of the main house coming into view, her home. Still standing, still hers, now secure because of what she and Kirk had accomplished together. The ranch hands who had remained behind during the drive emerged from the barn and bunkhouse to greet them, their surprise at seeing the wagon loaded with supplies quickly giving way to celebration when Zara announced that everyone would receive a bonus from the profits of the cattle sale. That evening, after the initial excitement had settled, Zara and Kirk sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Despite the December chill, there was warmth in their shared silence and the knowledge that they had come home not just to a place, but to each other. "What happens now?" Zara asked, her hand resting comfortably in Kirk's. He considered the question, his gaze on the mountains that had witnessed their departure months earlier. "Now we build," he replied simply. "The ranch, our life together, our future. And if Harrison or someone like him causes trouble again." Kirk's expression remained serene, though a hint of steel entered his voice. "Then we face it together, just as we did before, but I'm hoping our success might discourage further interference." Zara leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "The bank manager will be surprised when I visit tomorrow to clear the mortgage," she mused. "He was certain I'd be forced to sell." "I look forward to seeing his face when you prove him wrong," Kirk said with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening expanse above. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful in a way that seemed to reflect their own newfound contentment. "We should set a date," Zara said after a while. "For the wedding, spring perhaps, when the wildflowers bloom in the north pasture." Kirk turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. "Spring sounds perfect, though I'll happily marry you tomorrow if you're impatient," he added with a teasing smile. Zara laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch yard. Spring will give us time to prepare properly, and for the town to adjust to the idea of Zara Ellis marrying the mysterious gunslinger who helped her drive cattle to Cheyenne. They'll talk, Kirk acknowledged with a shrug. Then let them talk, Zara replied, reaching up to touch his face gently. We know the truth of who we are together. That's all that matters. As winter settled over the Ellis ranch, Zara and Kirk fell into a comfortable rhythm of work and planning. The improvements they'd discussed during the cattle drive began to take shape: repairs to fences and outbuildings, expansion of the grazing areas, preparation for a larger herd the following year. With the mortgage cleared and a standing arrangement with Donovan Shipping, the ranch's future looked brighter than Zara had dared hope in the dark days after her father's death. Kirk moved into the main house with minimal fuss or ceremony, though they maintained separate bedrooms out of deference to propriety, a concession that amused them both given the weeks they'd spent alone on the trail. His presence transformed the house from a place of memories and responsibility into a home again, filled with shared meals, evening conversations by the fire, and plans for their future together. Word of their engagement spread through Willow Creek with predictable speed, generating the expected mixture of gossip and speculation. Some questioned Zara's judgment in attaching herself to a man with Kirk's reputation, while others romanticized the unlikely pairing of the respectable rancher's daughter and the reformed gunslinger. Neither Zara nor Kirk paid much attention to the talk. Their focus remained on the ranch and each other, their certainty in their chosen path unshaken by outside opinions. As the promised spring approached, bringing with it new growth and renewed activity on the ranch, preparations for their wedding intensified. Zara ordered a special dress from Helena, while Kirk commissioned a local craftsman to create a wedding ring from gold mined in the nearby mountains. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, held as planned among the wildflowers of the North Pasture on a perfect May afternoon. The entire population of Willow Creek turned out to witness the event, some still skeptical, others genuinely supportive, all curious about the culmination of the unlikely romance that had begun with a cattle drive that no one believed would succeed. As Zara and Kirk exchanged vows beneath an arch of spring blossoms, the whispers and speculation faded into insignificance. What remained was the truth they had discovered on the long journey to Cheyenne and back, that sometimes life's greatest gifts came disguised as its greatest challenges, and that love could be found in the most unexpected circumstances. I, Kirk Vance, take you, Zara Ellis, to be my wife, Kirk pledged, his voice steady as he held her hands in his. To share in your dreams, to support your strength, to walk beside you through whatever life brings our way. Tears glistened in Zara's eyes as she responded with her own vows. I, Zara Ellis, take you, Kirk Vance, to be my husband, to trust in your goodness, to value your protection, to build a future with you that honors both our pasts. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd, even from those who had once doubted the wisdom of their union. In that moment of joy and promise, the last vestiges of uncertainty fell away, leaving only the solid foundation they had built together. The celebration continued well into the evening, with tables set up in the ranch yard and lanterns hanging from trees to illuminate the festivities as darkness fell. Zara found herself observing the scene with a sense of wonder, her neighbors and friends gathering at the Ellis ranch not out of pity or obligation, as they had after her father's death, but in genuine celebration of new beginnings. Happy. Kirk asked as they shared a quiet moment away from the main festivities, his arm around her waist as they stood at the edge of the property overlooking the valley below. Completely, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Though I keep thinking about how unlikely this all seemed a year ago. If you hadn't ridden onto the ranch that day, I'd have missed the greatest adventure of my life, he finished, pressing a kiss to her temple, and the chance to love the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Zara turned in his arms to face him fully, struck once again by how far they had come from their first meeting. He no longer the wary drifter, she no longer the desperate rancher clinging to her legacy. They had transformed each other, becoming more fully themselves in the process. They said it couldn't be done, she reminded him, thinking of all the doubts and dismissals they'd faced. 500 head of cattle driven by a woman and a hired gun. Kirk smiled, the expression now coming to him easily and often. Then let them laugh, he said, echoing the words that had launched their journey together. We proved them wrong in every way that matters. As they rejoined the celebration, now truly husband and wife, partners in all senses of the word, Zara knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had faced the seemingly impossible cattle drive that had brought them to each other. The Ellis Ranch now, the Ellis Vance Ranch in practice, if not in official name, would continue to thrive and grow. Their love, forged in adversity and strengthened by shared purpose, would endure. And the story of how a determined woman and a reformed gunslinger defied expectations to find success and happiness together would be told in Willow Creek for generations to come. In the wild, unpredictable West, where fortunes could change in an instant and danger lurked around every bend, Zara and Kirk had found something rare and precious, a love strong enough to overcome both external obstacles and their own fears, a partnership built on respect and trust, and a future limited only by the horizons they chose to seek together.